ReZero is a series that undoubtedly through the years has been put through its fair share of criticism. And this criticism can range from literally anything, whether it be Subaru's interactions with Rem or the world building of the series. In today's video, I would like to go through and address, or rather debunk, most of the main criticisms that I hear about ReZero and that I've been hearing for as long as I've been within the community. As I find that a lot of these quote-unquote critiques are not really critiques and instead are just misinterpretations of what's actually going on, or a misunderstanding of what is represented within the anime, because I find that most of the time it is the people watching the anime who walk away with critiques. That's not to say ReZero is perfect, and I will talk about that towards the end of the series, but majority of the problems people find with the anime are not really problems. So that's what today's video is going to be about. If you're a big ReZero fan and ReZero defender, make sure you leave a like and subscribe, and let's just get right into this. So how I will be doing this is I will be starting with the stupidest critiques, like to the point where you would have had to have watched like 2 episodes, not paying attention, scrolling TikTok on your phone, like not caring at all to actually walk away and surmise such an opinion. And I will progressively increase the validity of the take as the video goes on. So starting off with the stupidest and worst take I have ever heard about ReZero, and one that just like especially grinds my gears. I don't see it as much nowadays, but back when I was in the community around 2021, this take was rampant. And that is that ReZero is a generic male fantasy isekai. If your friend is a huge ReZero fan, this is peak rage bait. Watch 1 episode and walk away with this statement. To say the least, ReZero is quite literally defined as the opposite of this. In many ways, ReZero is a play on the isekai genre and is in sort of ways a critique of that fantasy. Subaru's whole character journey is representative of somebody who grew up within that type of environment, somebody who grew up as a Hikikimori, very much into anime and all those type of things. And that's why we get thrown into the world with his views. He walks in assuming that everybody is going to bend to his will and he is going to have some sort of magical power, assuming he is special for solely existing. Because Subaru is somebody who did in fact grow up watching those male fantasy power isekais. And the journey of ReZero and Subaru's journey, a lot of it, not his whole character, is him realizing that him having those opinions and him being in that state of mind was wrong and it was selfish. Subaru's warped perception of what a hero actually is the journey that we follow him on. And this journey was instilled by those isekais and pieces of media that are previously mentioned. ReZero is a definitive critique of this. The fact that Subaru can't just say and do whatever he wants is definitive and solid proof that, ReZero is not such. Look at episode 13, for example. That was the whole point of Subaru's character journey within season 1 of the anime. If it were a said, male fantasy isekai, Subaru would have walked away with Amelia within that scene and not have gone into a screaming match argument about what he wanted and what she wanted, because he was internally being selfish, because he was projecting his own insecurities onto her that were based upon the warped reality he had back in his old world, mixed with his lack of identity. Season 1 follows Subaru on the character journey of finding himself and conforming his own identity, not based on any false hope or any false perceptions that was given to him. That is why within episode 18 we see Subaru come to full terms with his self-hatred and tell Rem, hey, basically I hate myself. And it really is a play on emotional vulnerability and why emotional vulnerability is represented through true masculinity. Because without being emotionally vulnerable, trying to progress forward and show strength without showing vulnerability, that strength and that character is hollow. It is to prove the point that you must rely on the people around you, and instead of it being a generic male fantasy isekai where Subaru does everything on his own, he has to rely on the people around him and go about ways and actually be smart. And also the fact that he is not even given any powers, like it's just a normal guy, constantly being low-key like belittled a bit, like it goes against this idea. So yeah, that's a take that I don't even know how people come about. Like, you have to actually watch with your eyes closed, hands tied behind your back, like scrolling TikTok, like doing something else. Like, like I don't know how people walk away with that take, but they do, and they have. So yeah, I mean, it's peak rage bait for someone like me. Like, it gets me good. I can't lie, it gets me heated. So that is the stupidest take that I have ever heard on ReZero to this day. Let's move on to the next. The next stupidest take I have ever heard is that Subaru is a weak, annoying crybaby. Now, this one lies on the opposite end of the spectrum. This one comes from the people who actually want ReZero to be a generic male isekai and are pissed when Subaru shows actual flaws and weaknesses. Subaru is intentionally written to be a subversion of the generic isekai main character. That's why many people on that side, the power scaling boys, are not prepared when Subaru is actually somebody who is weak, shows trauma, and is not mentally prepared for the psychological trauma that he is going to have to put himself through as the series progresses. Where many main characters within the isekai genre just adapt easily and have no real character, Subaru's character development is the main driving force of his character and him progressing throughout the story. Subaru cannot progress within ReZero unless his character develops. That is like what I previously mentioned with the emotional vulnerability. Without Subaru being emotionally vulnerable and relying on the people around him, the ReZero story never really progresses, whether it be him crying on Amelia's lap within Arc 2, or having his conversation with Rem within Arc 3 from Zero, or with Otto in Arc 4. Like I said, emotional vulnerability is the crutch of ReZero and is the main driving theme. That's why when these power scaling boys come across the anime and see that Subaru is not tough and has no aura because he is low-key a crybaby, they don't like it. He's a character very akin to someone like Shinji Ikari, who actually breaks down and shows their true character and shows how they are emotionally impacted by PTSD and trauma. You get this with every anime that shows emotionally vulnerable characters, whether it be Shinji or Deku or Subaru. People don't like seeing the main character be weak, but with a weak main character, that is exactly what drives Subaru's character development. And eventually what makes him strong, not because he has any sort of great power, but because he has a strong character, strong connections, and a strong identity to conform himself. People finding Subaru annoying within the beginning of the series, it is intentionally written like that as such. Subaru is supposed to be annoying and corny within the beginning of the series. Not to say his character isn't a little corny, because he is. I love Subaru, but he is. But the level it is played up to within the beginning, like with him trying to shoot powers out of his hands within Arc 1 and, put on this act and stuff like that, is intentional, and that is why we get the moment of breakdown in From Zero, where Subaru reveals that everything up until this point and this person he has been trying to portray is just a character. He himself does not have any real identity. And for people to just blindly walk away and dismiss his character and write it off as silly or dumb or crybaby and stuff like that, it's just really redundant, and it is so annoying, to say the least, as a big fan of the series. The media literacy devil really strikes again and again with a lot of people. Next one that I would like to address is that there is too much drama within ReZero and that it is gore corn, if you know what I'm saying. This is the first one that I find a slight bit of validity to it. I do think Tape does get a little bit too much out of a kick of torturing Subaru, but that is more within the light novel and the web novel, and the anime tones it down quite a bit, to say the least. So a lot of these critiques are coming from, the anime-only watchers, in which I don't think the anime portrays this at all. Everything has a purpose within ReZero. The suffering serves a purpose, a thematic one, and one for Subaru's character. It is a challenge of his beliefs of the generic isekai fantasy trope, where Subaru basically thought everything was going to be sunshines and rainbows. He realizes that life does not come about that easily, and Return by Death is a dramatic representation of such. Death is not just glossed over within ReZero. On top of this, Subaru has lasting impact, as mentioned with the trauma with the last critique, and things that actually take effect. It challenges Subaru's false idea and that isekai fantasy trope that heroes just can overcome anything with pure grit and luck and surpassing your limits and, through strength. But sometimes you need to be smart. Sometimes you need to take a step back, look at your own character, recognize your own flaws, and rely on the people around you. It is Return by Death and the events that Subaru go through that is the driving force of this factor. Somebody in Subaru's position who went into this world with the idea that he was going to be the hero and he was going to be the main guy, having to come to terms with and rely on the people around him and realize that the people around him care about him and that his life has value and he shouldn't just throw his life away over and over again, taking selfless risks, is something that is very good. It is one of my favorite aspects about ReZero and Subaru's character, and the scenes within Arc 4 where we get Satella and the Witch of Envy directly tell Subaru that his life has value and that it is quite greedy of him to not rely on people around him and to instead throw himself into the flames is one of the best scenes within the whole series. The fact that Subaru actually does take time to come to terms with this and realize his character flaws and realize that it is okay to be weak is what makes his character so great. In many other series, characters will have a confrontational moment like this one time and immediately be good and be said. It makes Subaru human. Humanity and coming to terms with character development is not an exponential linear function. You have ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs. That is a realistic progression within life, within people. People don't just grow. You grow a little, sink a little, grow a little, sink a little, sink a lot, grow a lot. It's how life works. For Subaru to just blindly be amazing first try at everything would be redundant, to say the least. And as mentioned, getting back to my main point, as I've gone a bit off topic, Return by Death and the gore and the situation Subaru goes through is the driving and kicking psychological factor that puts him into motion. And also the fact that it is constantly emphasized within ReZero that Subaru never gets used to death. He never gets used to dying is really the main debunker of this point. Because if it really was just torture corn, Subaru really would just get used to it and he'd be okay with it, like we see within the Greed If routes. But as we know, dying is not good in ReZero, and Subaru should try to not die. A critique that I forgot about that I actually think is stupider than the last one is that Subaru has no consequences because of Return by Death. This critique grinds my gears, considering the fact that Subaru does not set his own Return by Death checkpoint, and it is completely random and he can never really know where Satella puts it. We get later consequences like this within Arc 7 and future arcs, but as an anime only, you don't see that as much outside of the fact that Subaru's, main heroine, the pillar of hope for him, the person that gave him support, literally lost their memories, that being Rem, and had their whole identity eaten with everybody forgetting about them. This ability and the fact Gluttony had this lasting impact kind of debunks this with as a whole. Return by Death is not this overpowered ability that can just rewrite everything. There is permanent impact, and we get that multiple times throughout the series. We've seen multiple times throughout the series in explicit examples that Return by Death can't just undo anything within the series. There is moments of mistakes, and Subaru does have moments of flaw. I don't have much more to say about this point. Rem literally losing her memories is a main debunker to this point. You have to only watch season 1 to walk away with such a take. Is that the pacing within ReZero is a bit all over the place and too slow, and stuff gets repetitive, especially within season 2 and arc 4. And I will say the pacing is slow within arc 4, but slow pacing is not inherent of bad writing. Pacing within arc 4 inherently has to be slow, as arc 4 was a growth arc and focused on our characters coming to terms with themselves. The reason there was so many internal monologues is because this is a character driven arc. These slower moments that we see, such as within season 2, are needed to build the psychological depth to our characters and actually make their characters make sense. You need to give reason and expand upon such reason to drive the goals of the characters, and that's what a lot of season 2 does. An ability such as Return by Death is narratively supposed to be repetitive. It is the point. Subaru is not supposed to die. It is not always linear. Subaru must have multiple attempts to come to terms with what is actually the right course of action. For it to just be linear would not be a realistic, explanation of what is actually going on, and would make his character much worse. On top of this, the slower pace is really what builded the side characters and built the lore of ReZero and the world building. We were able to expand on not just the main story and constant fighting, but actually understand the backstory of a lot of characters and give their characters purpose and meaning. Narratively, this slow pacing and slower moments are purposeful, although I will say there is a little bit of validity with this point, but it's not coming from people who are actually making that point, as in arcs like Arc 7, the pacing is a bit over the place, and there are moments which make you question, where exactly is this going? But again, that type of stuff hasn't even been adapted, and the people complaining about ReZero are not the same ones making those complaints. The next critique I would like to talk about is that there's too many waifus or female characters, and they're all in love with Subaru. This is not true. As mentioned before, ReZero is a deconstruction of the isekai genre. The waifu and, pretty girl archetype is there, but ReZero uses these characters, portrays them as one thing, and inherently deconstructs them throughout the story. If ReZero really was pandering to fan service, then Subaru wouldn't have rejected Rem within season 1 of the series. So much of Subaru's journey and things he has to come to terms with is to realize that Amelia within herself is somebody who has self-worth, a name, and identity. She is not this doll or pretty face that he could use to date or, just get along with. She's not some NPC, because that is the mindset Subaru went into the world with. And so much of his journey within season 1 and season 2 is coming to terms with the fact that Amelia is her own character with her own trauma and her own psychological background. The whole argument within season 2 is Subaru being representative and finally telling Amelia that he is okay with her flaws. He is screaming in her face telling her, "You are not perfect, but I still want to love you." These are characters who have actual emotional depth and backgrounds to them. In many ways, Amelia is reflective of Subaru's own lack of identity, being that she constantly got compared to the Witch of Envy, the most evilest person within the ReZero world, whereas Subaru was always constantly compared to a pillar of hope for him on the opposite spectrum, being his father, somebody who was viewed as great and amazing. These are both characters who reflect each other and internally struggle with identity issues. To just dismiss Amelia's whole character and psychological background and, her themes and thematics and her tying tying in with the dynamics of our own main character, Natsuki Subaru, and other characters throughout the series, as Waifu would be extremely dismissive of her character and her growth. On top of this, a character such as Echidna, who on a surface level just seems as a seductive witch, is a much deeply driven character with actual goals and, attempts of manipulation. She is extremely morally complex and arguably disturbing. The relationships represented by these characters are emotionally grounded and are not just, surface level character designs where, they look like a waifu or they may look good. These are actual characters with development and story behind them. They have an identity, they have a purpose, and it is the connection between these characters that drive their characters. So to just dismiss these female characters as waifu archetypes is extremely dismissive of their character as a whole, and honestly a bit disrespectful to the writing and the characters themselves. That leads me into the next point, and something that I will give a bit of validity to, that being the character design within ReZero and how it is a bit Gunnar-esque. I will say that this, point out is something that I do agree with to a T. I wish Tappei rolled back a bit on some of the designs, especially with characters such as Liliana. Also, the artist of ReZero, instead of drawing important or cool deaths, a lot of the time ends up just drawing, Gunnar scenes for whatever reason. I will also say though that, this portrayal and this, cartoonish almost character design of all of our characters is something that I kind of do like about ReZero. Hear me out. It is that contrast that we see on a surface level ReZero may appear. Like, if you were to just look at ReZero, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's definitely a generic isekai. It plays into that deconstruction factor of the isekai genre, being that these characters look innocent and cute, and then you go ahead and you actually get into the series and you see the psychological trauma and the riveting moments and the important background that they go through. The juxtaposition there between the character design and the actual character moments is something that I really do appreciate and enjoy about ReZero. Although I will say, from a distance and from a surface level, if you are not actually into the series, it could be a bit unappealing, and I do understand that problem. But like I said, if you actually get into the series and, get into the characters, it makes those psychological moments just that much more riveting, as these cute little character designs end up being some traumatizing, stuff. So honestly, that one is a bit of a double-edged sword, and there definitely is some validity to some of the character designs within ReZero that is not to be argued. One more that I will mention that is a bit valid for anime onlys is that ReZero can be a bit too complicated and confusing at times, and honestly, this one I can't fully blame you, as the anime does leave out a lot of stuff. Although not enough to the point where, things don't make sense, just enough where you have to seriously be paying attention. And ReZero is definitely an anime where if you haven't rewatched it, I highly recommend it. It is one of the most rewarding rewatches out there, and a lot of stuff is foreshadowed within the beginning. But yeah, a lot of the time, a lot of the context and other situations going on are explained a lot more in depth within the light novel and the web novel. Those are the critiques within ReZero that I think are invalid and I think are silly and they are dumb. So what are some valid critiques about ReZero? Well, as I mentioned before, I genuinely do think that the character design is a bit of a flaw, but at the same time, like I said, it is a bit of a double-edged sword, as it makes the actual moments within the series better. I don't know if Tappei or the author or the story is really to blame for this one. More so, this is the fandom theory side, so this isn't really a critique, I'd say, but I hate how within every single mystery within ReZero, it just goes back to, oh, must be Pandora's doing. Oh, this must be related to Pandora. Literally everything and anything is just Pandora is a scapegoat, deus ex machina, for whatever sort of reason. And that's not really Tappei, that's more so the fandom and the theory crafting side of it. So I don't know as much of a critique of the anime, but a bit of a critique of the fandom. Mentioned before, I do think the pacing does get a bit wonky within Arc 7 at times. We get very derivative of the main story and go on a bit of a tangent with other stuff. However, I don't think it's that bad enough where it is a genuine problem. I just think there is a couple of arcs and we get a couple of character moments for some characters who we will quite literally, honestly, probably never see again within ReZero that get a little bit too much emphasis for my liking personally. I don't like how in the web novel and light novel, Tappei jokes about Subaru's death and his trauma so much. I get it, it's for gags and it's not that deep, honestly, but for me, it just doesn't sit right. It feels a bit wrong and it takes away a bit of the stuff Subaru is actually going to. I also don't like the gospel cop-out. Tappei, a lot of the time, the motivation for whatever reason or whatever purpose is just the gospel said so, the gospel said to do it, it was the gospel and all that type of stuff. It feels like a bit of a cop-out, but I get you need some sort of motivation to drive the character moments and the series and stuff like that, so retrospectively, it's really not that big of a deal, but it is something that bothers me just a tad bit. Something Tappei also does within the web novel, or I guess I should say the light novel, is he will re-explain stuff often. We get re-explanations on stuff that would have literally just happened, and it'd be like, oh, remember this happened. But to be fair, that has a lot to do with the fact that the series takes about a 3-month break in between every single, light novel release. So kind of makes sense, to be honest with you. Those are my main critiques of ReZero. Outside of that, I don't really have much. What are yours? What do you think? If someone is arguing with you about ReZero, send them this video. I'm sure they won't watch it or they won't care, but it's funny to say the least to imagine that. If you want to rage bait a ReZero fan, this is the video for you. Use all of these points and just say the stupidest things imaginable, and it will work. Like, you will get them. They will fall for it, and they will probably tag me in a TikTok comment section saying, watch Barney Slayer's video and explanation, and it'll be really, really funny to see. So yeah, that about does it for the video. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know what more type of content you guys want. Anyways, yeah, peace.